Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty unusual, an official performance review of an entire year. Yep, conducted by a mysterious group called the Office of Universal Assessment. Okay, let's get into this. You can tell right from the start, this thing has a quirky, kind of satirical tone. There's a footnote here that debates what to call the reviewer. After apparently some legal battles over names like God, they almost settled on Dave. They ended up compromising on the very neutral, very bureaucratic The Office. And get this is the official job title for our subject, the year. It basically frames existence itself in the language of corporate HR. It's like time is just a gig worker on a fixed-term contract that it never even got to negotiate. So what's actually on the job description for the year? Well, as you're about to see, the scope of responsibility is just impossibly vast. Honestly, it's a job nobody would ever apply for. The year is responsible for, well, everything. From the weather and all of biology to all human affairs, all art, and even something the audit calls the private interior. You know, what happens inside our heads when no one else is looking. And, of course, death. Now, here's a really interesting point the document makes. The year doesn't get a clean slate. It's not starting from zero. The office is very clear that a year inherits all the baggage, all the unresolved problems from the year that came before it. And what does that inheritance look like? Well, it's pretty heavy. It includes active wars, a climate that's already changing, and even the cultural weight of every song that's ever been made and every story that's still unfinished. It's like being handed a world that's already in the middle of a sentence. All right, now we have to get into the tough part of this audit, the documented failures. And the report, in its perfectly detached corporate speak, calls them incidents requiring documentation. And you might be wondering, why the cold corporate language? Well, that's exactly the point. As this quote explains, the goal is to show how completely and utterly inadequate bureaucracy is when it tries to capture real human suffering. The failure of the language itself is part of the record. First up on the incident list is hunger. And the audit is really clear on this. It's not a problem of scarcity, not a lack of food. It's framed as a systemic, administrative failure of distribution, one that this year, like the ones before it, failed to fix. Next, of course, there are the wars. The audit notes that some of them were highly visible, debated, and mourned all over the world's screens. But many others were completely ignored, their devastating weight landing only on the people trapped inside them. And the last major failure listed is a much quieter one, but maybe just as devastating, a widespread, underreporting epidemic of loneliness. It's something that affects both the young and the old, in a world that, as the report says, is more connected by infrastructure, but not necessarily by depth. Okay, but after all that heaviness, the document does a complete 180. And this is where we get to the other side of the ledger, the overwhelming, even if much quieter, triumphs of the year. The document makes this brilliant point. Failures are allowed. A single broken window gets all the attention, right? But what about the quiet successes? What about the 900 other windows that didn't break? They're far more numerous, and they deserve to be recorded too. And this list of good things, it's huge. It celebrates all the people and the small patterns that quietly hold our world together. It praises teachers, caregivers, first responders, and even things like the stubborn persistence of humor. The report also zeroes in on these specific, unrepeatable moments of pure beauty. Like, for instance, that exact instant when a bunch of abstract marks on a page suddenly click and become meaning for a child who's learning to read. And I love this one. It even commends something as simple and profound as bread. It notes with this hilarious bureaucratic seriousness that bread has been consistently and systematically undercommended in prior reviews. And this is a perfect example of what it's talking about. This small, quiet act of future-oriented care. It's one of those moments that really sums up the year. It's a perfect example of one of those 900 windows that held. So, after all that, after weighing these immense, loud failures against these profound, quiet successes, what's the final verdict? What's the rating for the year? I mean, think about it. The audit considered everything from global wars to a loaf of bread, from epidemic loneliness to the moment a child learns to read. What could the final score possibly be? 3 out of 5. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds kind of average, right? Maybe even a little disappointing.
But the justification, the why behind this number, is where the real wisdom of this whole thing is.
So here's how they justify it. On the one hand, you can't give it a higher score because the massive systemic problems, they didn't get solved. But on the other hand, you can't go any lower because what the document calls the primary load-bearing structure of the year, things like love, hope, and kindness, that structure held strong.
And that's the whole point, you see. 3 isn't a mediocre score. It's the only honest score you can give to a work in progress. It's for a condition that is, and maybe always will be, failing and succeeding at the exact same time. So with that rating of 3 out of 5 locked in, the office issues one last official recommendation for what to do about this subject, the year. And the recommendation is simply this: continue. Not because the record was perfect, far from it, but because the capacity for beauty, for repair, for kindness, it persists anyway. And that's a simple, but I think a profoundly hopeful directive for whatever comes next.